Ever wonder what your life would be like if you won $1 million? This past week, I found myself dreaming about that possibility. Here's the backstory. I received an email from an attorney explaining that a couple who won the Arizona Mega Millions lottery had become philanthropists, and they'd engaged him to disperse the funds to help people impacted by the pandemic. I'd been selected to receive $1 million. Instantly, I think it must be a scam. But what if it's legit? I'll admit that I found myself distracted, imagining what life would be like, even with having to pay 40% of $1 million in taxes. I was willing to entertain that possibility. So sure, I looked up the attorney on LinkedIn and found no record of him and the firm that he represented. Actually, I did find the firm name was also the name of a mall in Venezuela. But I went so far as emailing a friend of mine who was an attorney to ask her for her perspective, all before closing down the possibility. Have you ever hedged your bets? Invested more time than prudent in hope of a long shot coming in? In real life, we don't always make decisions rationally, do we? Today's first reading from the book of the prophet Joshua opens with the elders and leaders and the officers of all the tribes of Israel being summoned to Shechem, which is situated in Palestine, an area we know as the West Bank. To provide some context of the ancient world, we're in the 13th century, before the Common Era. Shechem was the religious and political seat of power for the area. It's centrally located in a valley at a crossroads between two mountains. It has a rich biblical history. Shechem was where God appeared to Abraham, where Jacob's daughter Dinah was raped, and later it became the kingdom or the capital of the northern kingdom. After Moses died, Joshua was his successor. He led the Israelites in conquering Canaan, and he allocated lands to all the tribes. So Joshua recounts all that God has done and summarizes his message to the people in a black or white way, in effect saying, make a decision. Decide who you will love and serve, one true God or many gods. In effect, the message is either serve yourself and your ambitions or your God, your choice. And like any good leader, Joshua models the behavior envisioned. As for me and mine, meaning his children, we choose to serve God. The people of Israel responded and chose God. What did this choice mean? It meant freely choosing to renew the covenant relationship between God and God's people. Remember, I will be your God and you will be my people. At the end of the day, the people committed to live with integrity, where their external actions were consistent with their internal beliefs rather than the popular culture. And in our second reading that Eileen Butler proclaimed today, Joan Chittister offers us 3 options for those occasions when we find ourselves at a crossroads. We can quit, we can pause, or we can move forward. And that third option of moving forward demands courage. I find myself drawn to 2 specific phrases in this reading. The first is that prophets simply refuse to shrink a vision of tomorrow to the boundaries of yesterday. Think about that. They refuse to shrink the vision of what they see to what was in the past. And the second is that prophets choose to go on following the spiritual magnet of their lives rather than withering. In both these phrases, I hear echoes of Walter Brueggemann's quote from the book, The Prophetic Imagination. The task of prophetic imagination and ministry is to bring to public expression those very hopes and yearnings that have been denied so long and suppressed so deeply that we no longer know they are there. My friends, here's the secret. Those hopes and yearnings are inside of all of us, and we can choose to act on them in numerous ways. And that's good news. This theme of choice surfaces again in our gospel, which concludes a long string of bread stories. Is this a stumbling block? Does this shock you? This idea of bread of life as Jesus's flesh and blood? The invitation is to change our lives. In effect, Jesus is saying, devour my teaching. Make it part of you. Live it. And many of his followers broke away because living this way would be too hard. Like it was yesterday, I remember being stunned the first time I heard the words, receive who you are, the bread of life. It was January of 2012, almost 10 years ago, when I first heard those words in this community in Drexel Hill. I had no idea at the time of the journey we were embarking on, certainly what the impact would be on my life. Collectively and individually, each of you, whether you were around 10 years ago or not, really have been living bread for me, and I am deeply grateful. In many ways, Jesus was radical in how different he was. He did not fit people's concepts of God or holiness. He was too ordinary and unassuming. Yet the way that he cared for people set him apart. Over time, how we share our gifts as living bread for each other often changes and shifts. It delights me to see that kind of care. The way that Jesus dealt with people, I see that actualized in the day-to-day activities of so many people in this community. So many, but I'll only reference a few. Because on this rainy Sunday, I suspect some of us have other things to do after. But it occurs to me, this is one way that we at St. Mary Magdalene live Jesus's teaching. A conversation, a visit, a text, a mail, or a ride. And I suspect all I see is the tip of the iceberg. Most isn't even visible. And let me share a few examples. By someone who sends texts between 5:30 a.m. and 7 a.m. in the morning. It's our very own Charlotte. You know, initially, the text was a heads up that Jack had had a stroke and was in the hospital. Subsequently, that he needs prayers and lost his phone. Our very own Terry emails me when Jack moves to a rehab in Wayne. She visits him, then lets us know that he's moving again to a third rehab in Tavertown. And then that she couldn't reach him by phone. So much of what is life-sustaining for people happens because someone here makes the choice to care, to serve, to reach out. Charlotte Flynn and Terry Shields, Living Bread. I look at Jim and Fran Kaib. Jim is a wonderful guitarist and singer and has shared his voice and music with us. He and Fran are also Tai Chi Cha teachers and practitioners. And through the practice of gentle movement, they allow others to experience joy through movement. Jim and Fran Kaib, Living Bread. We see repeatedly the positive impact that prayer and heart-focused energy has on healing. Recent examples include Eileen's request that we pray for Zach before his surgery. Anybody else see on the news Friday, Zach's wife was interviewed? Pat's SOS prayer request to pray for the 229 Christian missionaries sentenced to death in Afghanistan. And Maria's request to pray in solidarity for the people of Afghanistan and Iraq, for the safety of our troops, for the missionaries, for the diplomats, for all impacted. Eileen DeFranco, Maria Marlowe, Pat McKittrick, Living Bread. As I said, I could go on, but I won't, because each of you know what you are doing makes a difference. God bless you all.